Cass Human Service Zone Advisory Board meeting in session. Sorry, my brain is not with the new time change and getting to bed late. So I just want to, before Blair does the roll call, I want to share with the board, and it probably would come out a little later, but Blair recently accepted a position in administration with the zone. She is our HR generalist. So we welcome her in her new role. She brings about 9 years of experience within the zone, and has stepped right in last week. Monday was her first day, so we welcome her to that. We're excited to be fairly full on the admin team. Samantha is out at a conference attending with it's UKG, the payroll system here, so with our county partners. So we're kind of full on our admin team at this point in time. So we have a lot of things, good things happening that way that will support the zone in general. So thanks for joining us, Blair.
Thank you. Mr. Grinberg.
Here.
Mr. Steen.
Here.
Ms. Fry.
Here.
Mr. Hagan.
Here.
Ms. Haugen.
Here.
Ms. Comer. Mr. Madler.
Here.
Ms. Bollinger.
Here.
Mr. Davison.
Here.
The next item that we have on the agenda is the approval of our September 5th meeting minutes, and they were included in the packet that was mailed out. Does anybody have any changes to those minutes?
Move to approve.
Second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Thanks, Rick. One item, and it's not on the agenda, but I just want to bring up, I had a phone call this morning from Michelle Comer, but I have not received an email. She will be resigning from the board. She has taken a different role and needs some capacity and time. And we will go over kind of board terms in December, but I have not received that official thing. I just wanted to send that or verbally tell all of you that, and when that email comes out, I will share that with all of you, her new role. Well, we're already on to agenda item 4, which is our friends down at the end of the table here, and I'm just going to do a brief introduction. Jason Coffey and Kristen Hasbargen both work for the Department of Health and Human Services. Kristen is the Director of Zone Operations. So we all, as the 19 zones across the state, work closely with Kristen in different areas, and I've found her to be valuable as I've onboarded here in Cass County. And just personally, I've known Kristen in my different roles in our community over many years, and some probably not supportive of when we had to close an office in Wahpeton, but we made it through that in my different roles. But and then Jason Coffey, what is your title? You are the zone accounting manager with the department, and Jason's fairly new in the role, last year, a year, and in about last month, we met with Brandy with the finance office and Sarah Heinley, who really works with the zones, Shelley Tang, who's unable to be here today, in that collaboration within the county here between our finance and indirects and the cost allocation plan. But we had a really good in-person meeting with Jason when he came out and our finance partners in the county. And my little light bulb went off at that point in time. I thought, hey, this might be a really good thing just as an education component for you all as board members to also hear and have just an informal discussion. Jason I sent out, and Catlin has the PowerPoint that Jason's put together, but I also printed it off because it's hard to see the PowerPoints in this venue for that. So I'm going to turn it over to Jason and Kristen, and probably they're open to questions as they come up, or if you want to wait till the end, however you would like to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Please feel free to stop me at any time. The PowerPoint's pretty short and sweet because I could make it 20 pages long with all the detail. So if you have some questions, please just inquire and, we'll discuss as we need to. And I'll try to keep it on my side, short and sweet, but allow you guys to ask whatever questions so you can better understand just how it is all meant to work. First off, thank you guys very much for giving me the time. I've been to just about every zone, talked with a good 30 auditors around the state. And one of the things I've noticed is a little bit of miscommunication and misunderstanding when the whole zone formation happened. And when I say that with respect to the funding mechanisms and what they were for. And so this opportunity to help you guys understand as well, if you don't, is excellent. So with that, I'll just kind of start going through some of the highlight points I have, and then again, take questions and help everybody understand a little better. So pretty standard HHS contacts is myself and Kristen. So a lot of it really, we know the direct funding for all the programmatic stuff, the FTE payrolls, the benefits, and the vast majority of the operating. The direct operating is funded by HHS. What I have found though, in talking with, like I said, 20, 30 plus auditors, is that there was a little bit of a misunderstanding almost that HHS was taking over all of the funding to include, to some extent, indirect costs. Unfortunately, the intent wasn't that. Legislative intent wasn't quite that. And also, unfortunately, it wasn't a high priority thing when this all began. We had a lot of work to get done and a whole new structure to figure out. And so now we're finally getting back to some of those things that were lower on the priority scale. And this is one of those, just help clarifying it. And so, like I said, there was a big misunderstanding in a lot of places that all the funding was going to be covered by HHS, including the indirects. We were going to essentially replace the amount of indirects that a specific zone or county deemed was part of, directly attributed to, the zones. However, the legislative intent really was that all the direct programmatic funding, so again, the payroll, benefits, and like I said, the vast majority of your operating was to be covered by the state. And the indirect costs, so the cost for the county to provide payroll, to provide HR, auditor finance office, board time, just all the other buildings and maintenance, all that was still indirect and was supposed to be covered 100% by the county through general funds, more likely. And what the state did was reimburse 25% of that. And that's, to me, where a lot of that miscommunication came in, is we, for whatever reason, didn't grasp onto that little part of it, that it was only a 25 reimbursement of the indirect costs. So what I've noticed is I've gone to counties and seen, I pay you $100,000, let's say, for indirects. And then for whatever reason, that's what the county is showing as indirects attributed to social services with $100,000. Well, legislative intent said you should have shown $400,000, and we just reimbursed your general fund 25%. So that's one of the biggest takeaways that I noticed in kind of visiting with everybody is that kind of misconception of how indirect costs get funded or reimbursed. And the next slide is going to take us down to just understanding indirect costs and the legislative intent of indirect costs. I put, during this last legislative session, legislators worked with us, and I think we came up with a much more common sense approach to indirect. And I got the definition there. You guys, please feel free to read through that. I did highlight one little part in there that does say that indirect costs do include. Sorry, I'm a little nervous. Do include legal representation, so your state's attorneys, your facilities and related costs, so your maintenance to the buildings and all that stuff. All that stuff per legislation is to stay as an indirect cost. So that's not an HHS decision, that's a legislative decision that obviously we're just implementing. But some of that communication, again, has just been lost because it wasn't a high priority at the time. And so here we are trying to fix that a little bit. What are indirect costs? So indirect costs by nature can't be controlled by the department individually. You can't, social services can't control the indirect costs related to them in the payroll department because they have no control over the payroll department. They can't control the indirect costs associated with them that come from the state's attorney. So they have really no control over indirect costs. They have control over their direct funds, their direct expenses, and that's it. Anything else outside of that is going to be related to other departments and their spend, not necessarily directly related to them. If you think about indirect costs, speaking of zones, if payroll department, for instance, let's say zone goes away and there's no zones in the United States. We get rid of social services altogether. And this is a hypothetical just to make a point, please. If they go away completely, your payroll department doesn't go away. So there's still indirect costs associated in payroll for all your other departments. Now, yes, maybe it goes down because you lose 50 staff or whatever. So, but overall, it doesn't change the fact that you as an entity is always going to have indirect costs. As long as you have more than one department, you're going to have indirect costs.
Meaning the county will always have.
Correct, because the payroll department is going to be there to support all the other departments within the county. And so technically, each one of those departments has an indirect payroll cost associated with it. Usually it's derived off of an FTE basis, And so what I've also found is that with the formation of zones and all this, we started treating zones separately as almost not like a department. And I'm not saying this county, but as a whole, just what I've seen from all the counties I've been to, almost all 53, I have 10, 15 left to go. That's kind of been the running theme is we're treating indirects for social services separately. And then when I go in and ask what's indirects for the sheriff's department, no one knows. But if I ask what indirects are for social services, we know. Yes.
I just want to say, because Brandy and Sarah aren't in the room, from my perspective, we have a really good relationship and collaboration with our finance office within the county. Sarah Heinley really knows it like the back of her hand, and then Shelley Tang with the zone, because I think that relationship and Jason has followed through for many years, and especially with this indirect and countywide cost allocation plan. I think it's been handled very good between the zone and our county partners, so it's not that, I think we're modeling some of that. I'll have to say, I want to give kudos to our county partners because they've been, they're right there. They answer the questions. This summer, there was a joint meeting out in Bismarck with the consultant, and Sarah and Brandy, they get their things done. Like when we have to get something and we need that information from them, it's done. So I want to just say, Jason's probably talking more as across the state, so.
Gail, question. So Jason, can we just back this up just a little bit, just for my sake?
Absolutely.
So we increased the budget from roughly 198 million to 252 million for the biennium for the zones.
Mhm.
Okay. So what what I'm understanding you to say here then is that is just strictly for programs, direct salaries, benefits, and operating.
No, that does include the payment for indirect costs. That payment is only, for the biennium, is only about $10 to $12 million for
Okay.
all zones.
So we set the budget legislatively for when we bought down those 20 mills, and that's where we're at right now. Okay, so now you're saying that indirect cost reimbursement, that 25% is part of that 252 million.
That's correct.
All right, so there's no dollars coming out of the county budget for those indirect costs? And that if we purchase some time from them, and I say we at the state level, the human service zone level, we use that $252 million to reimburse those indirect costs
At 25%.
at 25% of whatever those costs are determined to be.
Correct. And
And
they're
they can differ between each zone.
100%. And they're based on a multitude of factors. And we'll kind of talk about the county, Gail just mentioned it, the countywide cost allocation plans. It's something that we're working through right now to get those done. But we'll kind of look at that, and that'll kind of give you an idea of this is how we get to the number of like Cass County's indirect cost.
Right, I just wanted to make sure I understood the flow from the top down. So the second question I have, just clarification. So I didn't look at this, but so House Bill 1046, if I went to Century Code, that's what that language says, or that's what the administrative rules say based on the interpretation of House Bill 1046?
What I've copied and pasted in there that's highlighted, that's copied and pasted right out of the Century Code.
Directly out of Century Code?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right, I'm good.
Just to follow up, if I may. So just clarifying, I heard most of what Kyle asked about was, but the county pays for indirects, basically, but the department reimburses for 25% of that, at least that's what's budgeted. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so just a question, maybe this is digging way too far into the weeds, but, you know, having heard different things, I just trying to clarify here, you know, about, you've got the whole list of things that are included in indirect costs, in your highlighted sheet there. So I always wondered though, you know, and I understand generally how this works, but when we've got a department, okay, our department, not your department, our department, that has a fleet of copiers and printers and that type of thing, that they're the only ones who use that. That's still considered indirect.
That's when we get down to HHS interpretation, I'll
Yes.
kind of talk about that shift, because there was a shift related to the legislative change from this House bill.
Okay.
It allowed us to interpret it. So legislator was gracious enough to allow us to have a lot of input on this change. And what it did, and I'll just skip to that point here, what it did is it allowed us to put it pretty simple, I hope. If the zone can pay the vendor directly, it's a direct expense, and it's gonna be paid for essentially by the state.
That sounds simple, but does the zone have its own checkbook?
Yes.
They do.
Yep.
I'm just asking, I'm looking around for,
Essentially, they have their own.
so they have their own checkbook, so if they bought their own printers, computers, whatnot, they would be considered direct,
direct expense, as long as they're paying the vendor
directly, with their own checkbook or whatever that, I didn't know they had a separate checkbook, but okay. But, because it says here, but they can't pay the county directly, they have to pay the vendor directly on your second bullet.
Correct.
So the check would have to go directly to a vendor for that, of some type, okay.
So, but what you're referring to is new since legislative session. So when zones were first developed, they had a list, zones had a list of what was indirect. And copiers, all sorts of things were on there that made it really confusing and unclear. And so during last interim, there was a big work group, Association of Counties and Zones and whatever. It came up with like, what makes the most sense moving forward? Because that was one of the biggest concerns from county commissioners and folks saying, these indirects don't make sense. Well, how can we make this easier? And so, in addition to that definition, House Bill 1046, I can't read that far. I should know that, but really said, if it is 100% direct, 100% attributed to the zone, human service zone, it can be paid as a direct. So, not in Cass counties, but if I can use a different zone, they had maybe a technology support contract with NRG, through Association of Counties. And so that was considered an indirect that the county had to pay. And now if that contract is simply for only zone employees and zone functions, that is now a direct. So there will be, we're starting to see some of those indirects switch over to directs with the change in legislation.
And the service piece, as I understand, would be very difficult in Cass County. I mean, just because we have our own department doesn't make a lot of sense. But, I'm looking more for hardware and that type of thing that if we pay for specifically. I mean, I think, a couple things. Another thing would be, again, I don't, just throwing stuff out here because it's, think of that, that's basically for the most part a separate building over there. Who pays for the maintenance of that building?
That's through indirect.
County does, but if you were to have a separate contract, because there's a separate cleaning vendor, janitorial vendor, if you were to have that agreement with, separately, just for that building with that vendor, would that qualify as a direct?
I think because it's part of the facilities and related costs, such as utilities, maintenance, remodeling, that I'm just reading the definition. So therefore, it would fall under the indirect still.
Even if they could pay for it themselves and have their own
Yeah,
vendor?
and that's.
So that's kind of where it gets kind of goofy because it falls under that, so it really doesn't matter if the zone pays for it themselves. It matters if you determine if the zone shouldn't or should not pay for it themselves. Because the vendor we have for cleaning, I know we could have a separate contract with the zone, because it's a separate building. One building standalone, and you guys are very familiar with the building, obviously, that we could have a separate vendor do that work over there. And the zone could pay them. They would do nothing else. I can almost guarantee you that. But that still would be an indirect because it falls under the definition of indirect. So that's why I get a little confused. So
Correct.
how do copiers, printers, and computers, how are they different? If it's equipment.
It's, because in theory, let's say, again, social services went away off the planet, the state would just come in and take those, because they were bought with state money, if you will.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Okay, I get you. So
Where-
the hardware, the fixed stuff is okay.
So essentially stuff that could, the way I kind of think of it, if you will, and don't take this as like
Oh, I
exactly
just-
what it means, but essentially it is, we're gonna pay for anything that we can either get back in return, or that just goes with the employee if the employee left, i.e. benefits, payroll, stuff
Yeah, sure.
like that. Whereas the way I'd like to summing it up is, again, social services goes off the map, that building still stands, that building still has to be taken care of because it's still county property. And that's kind of why it stays in the indirect. I think that's kind of the philosophy behind the intent. Again, this is how we're interpreting it based on, the talks with legislators and stuff like that, and, legal team and all that. But really, it kind of boils down to that.
I get that, and that's a good explanation, I think, and I'm looking at, Commissioner over here, I'm thinking maybe something to put in your pocket as far as how hard items are purchased by the zone versus, I think right now everything comes through contract of the county. I could be totally wrong on that.
Well, like,
maybe changed
we've
since I've
been,
gone,
with
but-
Sarah and Brandy, we've been talking about that. Like, it didn't make sense in my head when I came on board. These copy machines on our 3 floors are only used by us. And now Sarah can pull that out as part of the lease and direct bill us for.
You did pay for that directly now.
Yeah.
We
So it's
will be.
considered direct.
We will. But our IT support comes from,
Support, I get you,
County.
there's no way to get away from that.
and we buy our equipment through the county because they maintain it.
So why doesn't NDIT provide your equipment if you're DHH?
We're not, we're county employees. So for county IT to support our infrastructure, that IT department, Bob, provides, these supports, and this is the hardware, and this is
The
the
hardware can
software.
be purchased. You buy this hardware zone, and you can go purchase the hardware. Our IT department would still support it. You're gonna pay for the support, but I don't think you have to pay for the equipment then.
We're paying for the equipment.
Because they
through-
can take the equipment with,
They're currently. paying
We're,
for the
we're,
equipment.
we're paying
You
for
are.
the equipment.
okay.
Yep.
So that's all been fixed.
Yeah, mostly.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so, and I use this other example too, you know, what I've been telling you, like, so you go to office, whatever, and you buy 10 boxes of paper, you get an invoice, and you give 5 boxes to social services, the county keeps the other 5. You can just make a copy of that invoice, social services pays for their 5 directly to office, whatever, and then the county pays for their 5 to office, whatever. You know, just kind of splitting up the invoice, if you will. I know HHS, or at least the health department, I know that we've done that in the past. You know, when I was with the health department, we had the health and environmental quality together. And it's 2 different pots of money, 2 different budgets. So what we did is, again, made a copy. Health sent a check for their amount, EQ sent their amount. And so, again, we could recognize the direct expenses on either side. And it's gonna be very similar for the counties, you know. What I tell everybody is, if you have to have a methodology to split out an invoice, so you're doing it based on a percentage or any kind of weird thing like that, then we're gonna just leave it as an indirect cost. Because we shouldn't be doing that much extra work to try to figure it out. And so there's a little bit of learning it's gonna take place, don't get me wrong. And again, that's why I'm doing these meetings in person, and, you know, coming and meeting with you guys is just so we can talk through those and help everybody understand. You know, HHS wants to be able to pay as much of the direct expenses for these zones as possible. You know, that's why our budget got a little bigger, to your point, is because we're taking on a lot more of those direct expenses now that used to be indirect. So.
Thanks. A good explanation, I appreciate that.
I got a quick question. You must have like a whole bunch of examples or cheat sheets for everybody, because I know we've been talking about this for a while in this organization. And I know it's changing here a little bit. You must have examples, or if there's questions, you know, they can just call you.
100%.
Because it's about how you bill too, like the way they say, so.
Yeah, my line's always
It's
open.
good.
I have great communication with all the finance people in the zones. I know Shelley, I talk to her quite frequently, you know, sometimes just to say hi. But again, legislative intent, our interpretation at HHS was really just to make this simpler. I mean, it's never gonna be perfect. The world isn't perfect. We're just trying to make it easier and better. And I think where we're at now is a heck of a lot better than that weird convoluted definition we had of indirect cost before. Again, that's why my big interpretation is, if you pay it directly, it's a direct expense.
Who sets the 25%? Where does that number come from?
Legislation,
Legislation?
yes.
Okay.
And so any more questions about indirect? I guess I should, not that we can't have more later, but. So the next slide starts to get into the countywide cost allocation plan. So this is a plan that's done for us by a vendor through a contract that DACO holds. The Association of Counties holds that contract. And basically what the cost allocation plan does is it tells you all your indirect costs associated with each one of your departments within your entity. So in this instance, it'll tell you all your indirect costs associated with social services, sheriff's departments, every one of them. And this is also the document I use to pay that 25%. And again, it's a reimbursement, so this is all based off of old information, because we're reimbursing you for what you spent, and not the other way around, like the direct funding you guys get for the year-to-year functions, the day-to-day payrolls. The next slide, this right here is a snapshot of this, basically the summary page of a cost allocation plan. These are not the true numbers. The plans are still in the works, and I didn't want to give you a kind of true and then have to answer questions about stuff I wasn't sure about yet. So I plugged numbers in here just to make it work, so that we can just look at the concept. Those plans are due to be done early December, mid-December, and I'm sure Gail will share those with you, because she'll obviously get a copy of those, because these plans are paid for on the behalf of HHS for the counties. The reason we have these is, according to our state cost allocation plan, the counties have a cost allocation plan, which allows us to get federal reimbursement for different programs and grants. So that's why the state pays for this, is because we need you to have it. And then it's just a matter of helping everybody understand it a little better so that potentially can be utilized by the counties for federal reimbursements of their own. A lot of grants, that's one of the requirements, is for you to have a countywide cost allocation plan or an indirect cost rate, which are basically the same thing. So there might be some availability out there for you guys to leverage some grant fundings because of having these plans out there. And so just looking at what we see here, so I've plugged in the total indirect costs that you guys have determined. And then column, the first column there, the Central Services Department. So Central Services Department are, like I said, those departments like your payroll that provide services for all the other divisions inside the county. Your insurance and risk management, your buildings, maintenance, and security. All these are support your other divisions that do more of the upfront work with the public. I don't want to ever sound like I'm talking down to any department, but I don't know how else to really articulate that yet. And so you'll see that, of the 1.58 or $1.518 million that's out there, the way it's set up, 17% is attributed to social services. Highways, roads, and bridges is 6%. Sheriff's Department, 18.8%. And so what you'll kind of notice, and this is kind of the reason why I wanted to show you guys this, what you'll notice here is social services zones isn't an outlier. They're not soaking up a lot of your indirect costs. They're really no different than some of your other large departments, especially like a Cass County that has a sheriff's department and a jail. So they're going to have quite a few employees. And any other large departments that the county might have are going to have very comparable indirect costs as the social services does. And so I found, again, back to earlier, we always know what social services is, and we're worried about social services and them controlling their indirect costs, but they don't have any control over indirect costs. And not only that, they're probably on the same level as 2 or 3 of your other departments, and yet you can't tell me your indirect costs associated with those departments. So for me, it's a balancing act of, we're worried about one department that has no control, instead of, maybe we should just look at it as a whole and how it's working, and how, if you're worried about decreasing costs or where they're at, we're looking at it as a whole and not trying to target one specific department that, again, has no control and is not even, according to this example, isn't even your biggest indirect spender, if you will. So that just really kind of breaks out how you get, each department and the amount that's attributed to them. The next slide, the last slide really, this is a snapshot of the human resources and county admin. So this is Cass County Human Resources and County Admin. This is how much they spent. And this is according to the financial statements that are given to us by the auditors. So in this example, again, these are all fake numbers. So these are just for presentation purposes. But you'll see, $646,000 is how much this department spent altogether. And of that, based on, and this calculation methodology is based on FTE. So based on the number of FTE and the total, this is how much is allocated to each of your individual departments within your county, including social services. So again, you'll see social services takes up a large portion, 28.13. Coroner's office, I think this spreadsheet has coroner and sheriff's department kind of together, or has separated them out there for some reason, and they should be the same But that's 28%. You know, sheriff's department's 14.99. I think in reality, it's probably closer to on par with what social services is. So you'll see that your HR department doesn't spend more or less time with the zones than they do some of your other larger departments. And so for me, it's just a good tool that the indirect cost and knowing the indirect cost really is more just for that. It's for knowing how your costs are affecting all your different departments. It's not really something that you need to make a journal entry to record or do anything like that. Again, it's more just for reporting purposes. And indirect costs, yes.
Jason, okay, in my head, so the cost allocation plan, there has been one, like, prior to my time, maybe in 19 or 20. That was, so now we're waiting in December. We have had, with the consultant, some meetings, or need to have a meeting with our finance department and us as partners. And they will put together this finalized cost allocation plan by December.
By December, yeah, early to mid of December, I should have the plans. Again, this is what I'm paying all the counties on, so I'm like, you gotta get it to me. But yes, because one of the big reasons why is, well, again, the plans run in arrears. So we're paying off what you already spent. Well, the last plan we have is what, 2019, 2020, which is before zones was formed. So a lot of that information is not accurate and correctly detailed. You know, it's probably closer for you guys as a single county zone. Some of my other zones, when this first happened, they weren't even part of the cost allocation plan because they didn't have any social services in that county. And so my current plan, even though they're the host county now, they're doing all the HR and payroll, they're not getting anything for the indirect cost because the plans aren't updated correctly. You know, that's the only fault in these plans being a year and a half behind, is if there is a big change, it doesn't always get corrected in time. So that's something we're working to do and that's why I'm pushing to get all these 2022 plans done and correct so that everybody's getting the 25% of what they deserve. So,
Jason and Gail, just what caught my eye in here, just as, don't need a big discussion here, but I'll forget it if I don't bring it up now. Under that, the plan summary page, you got building management and security. You had social services 0. What would normally go in? I know you didn't make these numbers up. I know they came from somewhere, but it's got 0 for social services. I'm just curious what should be in there as far as building management and security.
in theory, this should be the cost of the building and the building and maintenance. So if these were still getting depreciated, if, you know, any big remodels that had happened countywide, anything like that, and then all the maintenance time, you know, if you guys go replace carpets or, you know, do anything upkeep.
And they have their own security. Now, the reason I know is when you get into that building, you've got to go through sheriff's department security, and I see nothing there for that number. I mean,
And again, a lot of that is attributed to these plans not being updated to.
right, and so that's why I'm bringing it up here, so otherwise I'd forget to bring it up to Gail later, but something to take a look at, Gail.
Yeah, because
Okay,
that's what'll happen. So in theory, what she'll do, we'll use security since we're talking about that. So you'll get all the numbers for the sheriff's department. You know, you'll get their financial data, then you'll get their FTE numbers, and then we do what's called a PAR report, a people activity report. So that should kind of tell us, okay, we have, at any given time, there's 3 deputies stationed over there in that building, and there's 10 here and blah, 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 you know, wherever they're stationed or attributed to. And then the cost allocation plan will take that into consideration when it pulls out the indirect costs overall for each individual department. So in theory, it'll pick up, okay, there's 3 people going over there, there's, you know, their time, effort, you know, scanners and all, you know, all the stuff that's part of the overarching plan will get kind of attributed, if you will, to, it's a little more complex to be able to talk about it in here, but essentially that's how it works is they'll just say, okay, so basically 10% of the sheriff's department is attributed to social services. So that's what we'll say.
And that would be based on, because we have county extension or NDSU county extension, we have juvenile court, and then we also do provide space for some state partners in our building too.
And
So
all
that's
that-
all taken in account.
Yeah,
in
and that's
that.
why, one of those things Diane does collect, is square footage of not only just the building, but who makes up that square footage. So that again, the plans can correctly divvy all that out based on, in those cases, it's almost always a square footage thing, so.
And-
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just got a quick question. In corporate America, we use a lot of this allocation stuff, but it's not a perfect science, so you got a lot of, this is what we're gonna settle on, and it could change next year a little bit, but, I mean, you got a lot of decisions that are kind of gray areas, so you got a lot of work to do in this allocation model.
Yes, it's fine.
Yeah, a lot.
Well, again, that's the whole point. I mean, you can get as far into the weeds as you want, but I think as a legislator, I just want to make sure there's some checks and balances in the system and better understanding where the decisions are made. And, because we're not going to go from 200 million to 252 million the next session. There's no way we're going to provide that kind of increase. And so there's going to be some pushback in the next session regarding where those dollars went, how they're being spent, all the way down the system a little bit more. And so that's my biggest concern, is having some documents to be able to compare some of those changes that we made in the last session versus how we allocated the first session, when the bill was changed. Because to your point, there's a lot of variables in there, and you can come up with all the formulas in the world, but it's who's making those decisions on the variables, and, who's determining whether that's a reasonable variable or not a reasonable variable. Does that fall on the county financial people, or where does that all?
Well, for indirect costs, yes, because again, it's a reimbursement on what you've already spent. So in theory, the responsibility for controlling those costs, yes, do come down to the individual county's responsibility. But also that's what these plans do. So these plans are done yearly, and so it gives us the opportunity to go through and look and make sure that, and we'll do the variance analysis kind of like you're talking about. That's what I'll do. When I get the finalized plan, I'll sit down and look at the last finalized plan I have, the current finalized plan, and again, look for those big differences or big changes. And then make sure I understand why they happened. And then if I don't, then we'll go back to the county and ask, hey, what happened in this department that you either decreased dramatically or increased dramatically? So we do take that onus at HHS to vet, to the best extent possible, again, without getting in the weeds too deep, that these plans are accurate. They're not stuffed full of extra costs that aren't, articulable and legit, quite frankly. And we do the same thing for the actual direct expenses. We do desk reviews and stuff like that. We're going to be picking up on those, and we're just going to be vetting that everything that's being paid for is within program constraints, whether that be family services or county policy or anything like that.
So, what are we, 6 years into?
20 into the
Yeah,
zones?
yeah,
2020.
2025.
So only, yeah, so we're just
4 years,
Four.
okay.
going into
Maybe
4.
to Brian's point, and then I've heard Senator Davison say a couple times in this discussion over the last few months, this is gonna take a few years to sort out and get perfect.
Yes.
Well, perfect's never achievable.
Correct.
Close to perfect. So if Brian's point about a lot of gray exists, even in private industry,
Yes.
and with the cost increases, one would presume in the near future, couple years, that indirects would be well-defined and pretty much set. This is what it is.
Unless
this
it's
is what
changed by legislature.
Right,
Yes.
yeah, unless changed by legislature. So, from a long game perspective, box checked. Large effort was made last time on gap and salaries.
Yes.
So at some point, this model will perform at its optimum performance through this.
That is the hope.
2 years from now.
And I use the same, you know, when we redid these budgets that legislators just approved, you know, we had to budget for all these new direct costs that were shifting out of the county's responsibility and into the zone/state's responsibility. And we've had a lot of discussion about this because we had to guess. We had to take our best guess. You know, my zone directors spend a lot of time talking with their finance departments, partners in the county. You know, hey, what are we spending on this that I'm going to be paying for? What are we spending on that? And, you know, we try to capture as much of those as we could and use numbers that, to my boss's boss, you know, where I can look everybody in the eye and say, I think these are correct numbers. You know, pass that red face test. So what we're gonna find, and I know this, is our first year's budget is a crapshoot. We're gonna be way over in some parts, way under in others. Our next year's budget, it's gonna be a lot better. And then in 3 years, to your point, the long game, we're gonna have a lot tighter budgets because we'll have a better idea of what's fully getting shifted over because of this indirect cost shift in our intent. So it's not perfect. It never will be, to your point. But we're just trying to do it as simple as possible that makes the most sense, that gets everybody the answers they need. Whether that be legislators, zone directors, my HHS admins, anybody.
Quick question. So you're gonna have to have guidance on all these allocations that you'll send out. And if they deviate from that, then you would jump in and debate as far as the allocation percentages, whether it's square foot or FTEs, there's a whole bunch of different models to use.
Well, because what happens is, the Abacus is the current holder of the contract. So Abacus works directly with the auditor's offices, and they get all these numbers directly from them. And so I don't ever go in and double check that they gave me the right square footage or gave Abacus the right square footage or anything like that. I do look at the plans at the end of the day, like I said, and compare them to prior plans to see if there's drastic increases or decreases that might need to be. But in theory, indirect costs shouldn't, they should slowly make an increase. And that increase is almost always attributed to salaries, benefit increases, and, you know, some of those other things that are, you know, utility prices going up. Those are really the big factors, at least in our situation here, that affect indirect costs. Unless you go out and add a whole new building or add 50 FTE, it's really not gonna change your allocation numbers, your percentages, or your actual costs. They should really just slowly rise, given whatever the market is. If the market has a huge increase, then indirect costs are gonna have a huge increase. But there really should be fairly consistent year over year, fairly consistent climb. Because the price of everything always goes up, unfortunately.
Well, this may sound a little harsh, and I don't really mean it to. But that's my concern, because then you have accounting people running the strategy. And in these indirect costs, the leadership of the county that's in charge of this at the end, not the finance people, they need to understand the strategy of it so that they can make decisions to become more efficient and effective. The accounting people plug the numbers in. We need the leadership of the county to understand the numbers and understand the strategy so that they can shift and make decisions that are more beneficial to the people they serve and also to the taxpayers.
Yes, and for me, that's an underutilized piece of these cost allocation plans, is I think they can be utilized for that very reason, for that very purpose. Again, you go to most zones and they can tell me indirect costs for social services, but not the rest of any of the county departments. So these plans will give you that, you know, and again, these are the county's plans. We foot the bill through Indaco for you guys to have these plans. So these are 100% your guys' plans. So again, Gail will get a copy and your auditor's office will get a copy. At minimum, those two offices, will get a copy of this. And then I'm sure, you can call me and I'll give you a copy. But I'm sure Gail can get it to you, or your auditor's office can get it to you. But yes, Senator Davison or Mr. Davison?
Kyle.
They,
So can the county, did we let the state and the counties move money back and forth now? I know there was discussion in the session. You used to only be able to send money one way. The state
you mean
couldn't,
in the 457?
in the 457.
It's still that way with the exception of payroll. Because
With
of
the
block
exception of
grant.
payroll? All right,
Because of
yeah,
the
because of the
block
block grant, okay.
grant. Yes. But within the counties, it's very much, and I'm sure this is probably something Kristen was planning on talking about too, is the collaboration that this is allowed because of the new funding mechanism not being directly attributed to counties, where we can provide help to other zones, and there's not that, well, your county needs to pay my county because that was levied here and there. So it's a part of that whole philosophy change is that working together piece. And that is not just the zones, that's HHS and the zones. That's me in the auditor's office, sorry, I'm taking all the credit. I didn't mean it that way. But it's just really trying to work together, because at the end of the day, we just want to serve the clients. And that goes from HHS to zone directors to, I'm sure you guys, I won't speak on your behalf, but that's what it's about. So,
Very good.
Just considering time, and I know we probably got a little bit down in the weeds, but I thought it was good information to share and have a discussion, and there might be opportunities in our next board meeting to discuss further, and very open to that. But I want to also give Kristen an opportunity, if you have any operational things on the zone front to share or any updates.
Right, I, certainly in the interest of time, Gail, I have not a slide deck prepared or anything like that, but.
So you can talk.
I can talk, right. No, I think probably the biggest thing involving CAS is obviously the stabilization and support that we're doing. And so that all zones and department and CAS, and really excited about the progress the zone is making, as well as hiring staff and getting them onboarding. And it's just been really exciting to see the progress. So we're not there yet, but we're getting there. So it's exciting.
And part of that discussion, a couple months back, probably September, shared the Family Services Support and Stabilization Plan. And our state partners have been really key in that. One, I want to publicly shout out, there's been over 10 zones across the state. Probably wouldn't have been able to be done so easily to share staff. We have staff here today from Buffalo Bridges Human Service Zone that is helping the week and taking cases with our child protection. We have 4 or 5 others from a couple of zones, South Country, and I can't remember the name of the other one, coming next week. So since mid-August, approximately 10 zones have sent staff or have process managed. And then our 3 contiguous zones are onboarding some of our new team members in Family Services. We have 5 newer team members in CPS at this point in time. 3 are being onboarded at Agassiz Valley and 2 RSR, which has made a significant difference overall. And just to give you some numbers, just high level, since mid-August, I think we started with, and I also want to give a shout out to the case management side, but about 450 open CPS assessments at that point in time. Today, I just printed that off and I thought I brought that over. As of last week, we had 235. So we've made a significant headway in closing out. And actually, we submitted and closed out 26 cases. We had workers that had probably 60 cases, which a caseload should be more around 20 or under. And currently, to date, our highest caseload right now is 35. We've made a significant, and that's, Kristen is the partner that kind of reaches out to other zone directors and looking at ability, capacity, and all of that to be able to help us out. And really thankful for that partnership, as well as a lot of other field service specialists coming to site here to provide direct supervision to be able to close out cases. So our CPS supervisors are actually working cases right now. And then we have slid over 3 volunteers from our case management side to work CPS cases right now. So we're still, knowing that, we're about 7 CPS case managers, the case management on the foster care side, vacancies right now. We recently, and I think we're at only, we have 5 onboarding. We will have 1, 2, 3, we have 4, no, actually, we have 3 CPS workers vacancies right now. So right now, we just received a roster, and we will re-advertise again right around Thanksgiving to do that. So that onboarding process has been going good. We have a worker a new team member, but he will not start till January. He's moving from Texas back to North Dakota with child welfare experience. And we currently have just received the roster for our family services manager. So that gives you a little background on that. Do you have more to say, Kristen? I think those were the highlights I wanted to talk about on that. As far as economic assistance, in the meeting packet that was sent to you included the management evaluation and civil rights program, do they call that, review. So if anybody had any questions, but it gave a letter requesting we had corrective actions related to timeliness and some income verifications and policy, and we provided a letter back saying how we're going to address those corrective actions, and we will be doing that by the end of December. Let's see. Any questions on or comments on that at all?
I got one question, reading through the EBT card issuance and replacement. How's that transition working okay? We don't issue them anymore at the local offices?
Correct.
Did we add some time onto that? Or is it?
There are situations where it would be nice to be able to offer that issuance, a homeless individual, but I think for the most part it is going. We've had a couple calls and situations we've had to address internally here within. And I don't know, Kristen, I think we've discussed it as state zone directors, if there's any options there. I believe they're looking into if there's any availability that in certain circumstances, but there is a contract with an outside vendor to do that, so. Anything else? What else did I write down here? Support. Oh, the other thing I did want to highlight about economic assistance, as you know, we redesign started in February, and as of October 23rd, we still work in a region, but economic assistance cases are being worked statewide across the whole state, not just within our Region 4 that I provided that map to, and to level that caseload out. And so that started, a couple weeks ago with regards to that. And you can read in the director's report I provided, gave a little bit of course, LIHEAP season started now, and there's some things related to that. Samantha and I are also working on, and we'll have further discussions. Julie was kind enough to meet with us this last month, talking about an advisory board handbook. Like, we need some basic things that we're looking at in 2024, and really starting to put some of those key performance indicators together that kind of help set a picture that maybe as a board you can take those stories or might provide some second steps. So there are some beginning parts of that dashboard being put together here. I shared some information from Family Services data that gives you that snapshot, as well as our personnel kind of snapshot, which has a lot of good information on. The positive thing, I think we're heading in the right direction to become more stable. Yes, do we have vacancies? Yes. But I think overall, we're about 5 FTEs short in EA at this, well, 3 EWs, 4?
6.
Oh, 6, 5, I was gonna say 5. And about 10 or 12 in family services. So we're maintaining, but there's a lot of positives going in the right direction. Also, we continue to work with Jason Matthews. We started the vision and values process this last year or this last spring, and it was implemented and put out this summer. So there is an internal team of non-supervisors, no admin, but a team put together that is working directly with Jason to an alignment team on how our vision and values as a zone will be aligned. And ultimately, the goal would be they will do that presentation. They're putting together that plan. It will come to admin, and it will also be, they will provide that report to you directly as well on that. It's 2:00. Our next meeting is December 4th, which is the first Monday. Hard to believe it will be December. Any other questions or other business for the board? Nothing? Motion to adjourn? A second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank you. Thanks for your time.